So from time to time, I've mentioned to folks on this channel the difference between the way people learn now and the way we learned when I was growing up in the 1960s. That's getting to be quite a little while ago now. And I realized that a lot of people, having not experienced it, maybe can't quite picture it. So here we go to talk about the way we used to learn. First of all, the resources that we have now just weren't there. You didn't have videos. I mean, the only way you saw a video was if it came from a TV station. And a video camera required a whole big setup and a professional cameraman. That, of course, is completely changed. We had some books, but they were limited. We had lesson programs, but they tended to focus on your equitation, how you rode. Very little was offered as to how you learned to interact with your horse and training. We didn't have any computers. A computer would have taken this whole room to contain and would have been owned only by the largest corporations throughout the 60s and basically the 70s too. So all of the resources that we have literally in our pocket in a smartphone simply didn't exist. So the other thing is it was a different time, a different mindset. So people were influenced by what they did see, and what we saw were Western movies. And if you want to know what was wrong with horsemanship, at least on the Western side in the 1960s, watch most of the old Western movies, and you'll see a lot of running and jerking and spurring, and that was literally state of the art. That was what a whole set of folks aspired to. How fast can we go and how much dust can we make? Not real productive. If you wanted to do better, you had a few books, you had some clinics, but they were rare. And you could turn to the old timers, the crusty old guys who didn't know what they were doing, but seemed way more dedicated to preserving their secrets than passing on knowledge. Again, that has radically changed. The exchange of information is a lot freer, and frankly, those who have knowledge often recognize that they can monetize it. That's fair. Back in the 60s and the 70s, there were not many people handing that out, even for money. So you might go and hang out at somebody's place and sort of hide and watch, do odd jobs for them and watch what they were doing. And if you want to get an idea what that was like, put up a training video from today and turn off the sound, because those guys were not talking to you and spoon feeding you the information. You had to watch and pick up on nuances. And you had to wonder what happened the minute you left the premises, and they could really get down to business, because it was like a secret society. So if you were lucky, you could catch on with somebody like that, and they would kind of take you under their wing, because at some point, some of those folks did hate the idea that everything they had learned was going to die with them. But you were in a chosen few if you fit that category. And usually you had kind of a long apprenticeship of hard knocks before anybody took an interest in you. So that left us with the scientific method. You formed a hypothesis, and then you saw if you could disprove it by experimentation. And there was plenty of experimentation, most of it by me. In a way, that has let me remain sort of liberated from any of the hard and fast schools at this point, because I'm not afraid to invent shit. So in a way, having to learn from the horse and from experience, they were hard lessons, but they stuck. Better today. You can get some of both and hit a really nice mix where you are still trying things out. You're still ringing changes on what other folks are showing you, but they are out there showing you things which they never would have been doing back in those days. So probably the best way that I can illustrate how we used to learn is by an illustration, by a story or two. My lifetime with horses really began one Christmas day when I was either 8 or 9. We went out to the farm that we had purchased within the previous year or so outside of town. My dad had gotten a horse, but we pulled in on Christmas Day, and there in another stall next to the horse stall were 2 Shetland ponies. And my dream had just come true. My dad kind of took a little of the shine off of it by telling me, your pony is a yearling. He's not ready to ride. But you can teach him to lead. And the good news is your sister's pony is a 2-year-old, and she's too little to start that pony herself, teach her to ride. And my dad, too big, so your job. Oh, sure, I was in, although I had absolutely no idea of what I was doing. So my first lesson came from the little pony that we had gotten for me. Now, of course, he was a stallion and would remain a stallion for reasons that continued to be mysterious to me. But I don't know if anybody ever castrated a pony back in those days. They just ran around, and you learn something real fast. They bred like rabbits. I digress. My dad hands me the lead rope, and I noticed that it was a different rope than was on the little mare pony who had been trained to lead. It was about 20 feet long. He said, here, you may need this. I just take him out and see if you can lead him around. So I led him out of the barnyard, and he saw the wide open spaces and threw his tail up in the air and took off in a straight line and jerked me down. And the only thing I could think about were those old cowboy movies. I thought, what would a cowboy do? And I knew one thing was the cowboy wasn't going to cut loose. So I sort of skied on my face down this slope in our farmhouse yard. And when I got to the bottom, I had sort of anchored that pony down to where he stopped and faced up. And I sit up. I've got the dry winter grass that remains around, through the winter. It's in my mouth. It's stuck in my nose. And I kind of blow it out and spit it out. And I think, man, this isn't what I had in mind. This is way better. And it all started that way. Started doing everything exactly wrong. But I was exactly the right kid to gravitate toward hard knocks. I figured, hey, this is how it is. So time came, I got both those ponies broke to ride. I will tell you that a good day was when I only fell off each of them once. A bad day could be 4 or 5 times. It never occurred to me that there was anything unusual about coming off a pony. It was kind of what happened. But little by little, I got stickier. I got both of the ponies riding, and I figured I was kind of a hand. And from there, over time, we progressed to horses, and we did get some instruction on proper riding. And I also, though, continued to learn from those hard knocks. When that pony jerked me off my feet, I pretty quickly realized that if he was going straight away from me in a line, I was just easy to pull. But if I stepped off to the side and got him on an angle, all of a sudden I had a mechanical advantage and I could make him swap ends and face up. And it wasn't too many of those episodes till he didn't do that anymore. So we got some riding instruction, started riding some horses, and then when I was in my early teens, I encountered an old horse trader known universally as Pony Bill. And he was one of the fellows who took advantage of a boom in the early 60s for Shetland ponies. Everybody wanted to have a Shetland pony because nobody had had one. They seemed small, they seemed perfect for children. Little did we realize how carnivorous a Shetland pony could be. So he had made a ton of money on these ponies, to the extent that for a while it became advisable for him to move out of the county, which he did. But after about a year or so in Florida, he came back and started trading horses, which is what he really liked to do. And I went over there with another man to look at a horse. And Bill, whom I did not know, said, "Here, boy, get on him. Let's see what he can do. Let's see what you can do." And this was a nice horse. I got along with him. And he was doing some things that I had never done, but I was ready. And Bill was kind of intrigued, and he said, "You need to come back." And that was rare. And from that day on, he welcomed me as if it was his job to teach me stuff. And that's all well and good, but the way people taught back then was different, just as the way we learned is different. He taught by object lessons. He would let you learn from circumstances, which sometimes he set up. Before I could even drive, my mother would bring me over, drop me off at Bill's on a weekend, and I might not be back till Sunday evening. And every time I arrived, it was like Christmas, because he was a dealer and he'd buy horses at sales, he'd buy horses privately, and he'd go around to the 6 or 8 stalls he had there and out in the lots, and it was like opening presents. What's here? What's here? So one day I come in, I drag my saddle out of the trunk, and there standing in the relatively small riding area he had, maybe 60 by 100, good place to show horses to prospective buyers because they couldn't run off, which was my intention. Here's a big dark colored gelding standing there. And he looked like he had a little draft in him. He was about 15'3", weighed maybe 1250, feathery legs. And Bill's in the little tack shop that he used to run there. And I walked in and said, "Bill, that big bay horse out there, he looks kind of like a likely type of horse. Can I try him out?" "Yeah." "Remember something. He hadn't been ridden in 4 years." And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll remember that." And I thought, well, that is a bit of a layoff. So I got him out and led him around a little, saddled him up, and he sort of puffed up. And I thought, well, I wonder how this is going to go. Well, I soon found out. I stepped up on him, and he just ironed me out. So I chased him around a little bit, and he bucked pretty hard. And after a bit, when he was blowing, I crawled back on him, and he didn't buck again. But he also didn't guide. He was dumb as the proverbial box of rocks. And every so often, I'd see in the tack shop, I'd see the curtain pull back as Bill watched things develop. After a bit, when things are going pretty well, Bill comes out, he says, "Well, how's it working out?" I said, "Well, he's not too bad, but my word, he doesn't guide. He doesn't know a darn thing." Bill says, "Well, you got to realize he hadn't been ridden in 4 years." And the nickel dropped finally. I said, "Bill, how old is this horse?" And he says, "Oh, he's a 4-year-old. And Bill had told me in the past, he said, when somebody tells you about a horse, don't believe a damn word they say. They're either lying or they're wrong. Study the horse." Well, Bill said he hadn't been ridden in 4 years. I didn't connect the dots. I didn't listen to the stuff the horse was telling me, but I never stopped listening again. But I said to Bill, "Bill, why would you do that to me? And he repeated, he said, "Never believe anything anybody tells you about a horse." I said, "Even you?" And he looks me right in the eye and he says, "Especially me." And that was an education. Listen to the horse. Read the horse. It is completely true that when somebody tells you this is a nice, quiet horse, their definition of a quiet horse may simply be a dormant volcano. You just don't know. You can't believe them because they're either wrong or they're lying most times. Make up your own mind, gather your own information. That was a life lesson. So that was one time. Another time I went over, and you grab little bits of information here and there. And there was a filly out already saddled in the pen, and a couple of the kids that would help out were sort of gathered around, and I noticed a lot of them were kind of dirty, which suggested to me that they'd had some problems with this young horse, probably about a 3-year-old. She wasn't a bad-looking horse, quarter horse. And I said, "Oh, what's up? What's that?" "Well, we haven't been able to get on her. We don't think she's going to be that bad, but she just sort of squirts out from underneath you." Now, it never occurred to me at that time that maybe a little groundwork might be in order. Maybe getting the horse a little softer to where they'd give when you did get on them would be wise. I just remembered a line in an article I read about a guy starting broncs in Western Horseman. And he said, "When I went to get on those horses, I'd just cheek them around." And I said, "That's what I need. I need to cheek this thing around. And that'll take her head away. Her back end will go the other direction. I can get on her. And from there on, I got more than a fighting chance." Now, I had never cheeked a horse before because I'd never really ridden one that needed to be cheeked. And I didn't know how to do it. There are better ways than just grabbing them by the cheek piece and dragging their head around, although I will, to this day, shorten a horse up a little bit so that I can yield them when I get on. But I didn't have a clue about any of that. I just had that one line in that article. I like to cheek those broncs up when I got on them. So I took a hold of the one-eared headstall and I pulled her head around. And as soon as my foot cleared her back, she took her head away as best she could, and the bridle stripped out over her head. And I'm sitting there holding the damn bridle, and she bawls like a bull and starts to buck. And it was old school at its best or worst. And I was probably 16 then. And I rode her. I rode her till she quit bucking. And because nobody could get close to her, I rode her around without the bridle on for quite a little while. And the more I did that, the quieter she got. Finally, we caught her, put a bridle on her. I rode her around a little bit, realized that she had never been successfully ridden and had developed quite a habit. And I learned a couple of things. First of all, you have to do more preparation. Second, maybe you ought to have more than a line in an article to rely on when your life's at stake. And finally, just how forgiving horses are. Because that horse, despite that blowout, became a very pleasant horse that sold real well and had a successful show career. She was a nice horse. Not because of anything I did, because she was born to be a nice horse. Had taken a wrong turn, and maybe I helped her get back on the straight and narrow in a very crude way. So you learned little things as you went. As I got maybe a little more advanced, I started teaching horses to turn and turn around, and that was something I just thought was cool. And I had a big paint gelding back before there was any paint horses much around. He was a crop out, as we'd say. He was out of 2/4 horses, but he had excessive white, so he couldn't be registered, but he was a nice horse. But he was big, lanky, and a little awkward, and I'd try to get him to walk around to spin. He'd bottle spin. His back end would move as much as his front end. So I had read that the key to a spin is to stabilize the back end, to arrest the movement of the back end. So I thought, well, I can do that. Let me do it mechanically. I went and got myself a piece of soft rope. I tie his hind legs together and I say, "There, now you're not going to swing your hind end around." And I started turning. It went real well for the first half of the turn, and then he fell in a heap. And I had to untie his hind legs and let him stand up, and I realized that maybe mechanical gimmicks aren't the answer. I certainly never tied one's hind legs together again. So those are the ways that you learn stuff. You had to try things, but you had the freedom to try things because in those days we were very risk tolerant. Parents didn't think much about their kid getting on these horses that would try to peel you like a grape. That was just what kids did. We I grew up in the era of everybody smoking cigarettes. You couldn't get a car with seat belts unless you special ordered them, and then you got lap belts. And the first time my mother decided to get seat belts, the car dealership said, well, they're for airplanes. And if you didn't have the seat belt, or even if you did, you had to be a little careful if you were in an accident because we had steel dashboards. Everything was more dangerous. We all accepted that things were more dangerous. So we were at liberty to do some sort of reckless things. So continued experimentation and some more meaningful lessons from Pony Bill, as he was known, and from some other folks who saw maybe a little promise in me, moved me further down the line. Also discovered some books. This is a book published in 1950, The Breaking and Training of the Stock Horse by Charles O. Williamson. This was literally the first thing I read that explained how important it was to supple your horse and do groundwork and have him right before you got on him. Recall that this book came out before the Dorrance brothers wrote anything, before they were doing clinics, before Ray Hunt would have been a young man working on a ranch. That was how far ahead this guy was. Now, were his methods polished? No. Were they crude by today's standards? Yes. But they were light years ahead of most of his peers. The other book that I relied on was The Complete Training of Horse and Rider. This is a tattered copy by Alois Podolsky, who was principal rider and director of the Spanish Riding School. And it was a dressage book, but it taught you all sorts of horse mechanics. And I lived by that book, and I've read it multiple times, and I get something out of it each time I revisit it. And the final book that was real helpful to me, and I don't have a copy of it, I think I may hunt one up if you can do it, was Horse Handling Science by Monty Foreman, who had made a real study of how you got a horse doing things, what their body mechanics were. He used photographic and film, straight up film, to help him sort things through, a lot of slow motion. And he was getting things done way ahead of his time. So we gradually began to have more resources. At this point, we have available to us all of these resources. It's almost an information overload. Use the resources. Pick the things that work best for you. But don't accept anything blindly. Never suspend your independent judgment. If something seems wrong, it may be right for everybody else in the world, but it might just be wrong for you. Listen to people who offer you things and decide if it's going to help. And that's really what our YouTube channel's about. I have no expectation of this ever making me any money. It certainly hasn't so far, and it never will. But despite having enjoyed the hard knocks and the hard lessons and the excitement, I don't know that I would want somebody else to take those same risks. So use this channel, use the other resources you have, so that you can start where I am, not where I started. And you'll be so far ahead of me by the end of your journey, I won't even be able to see you up there. So those are some thoughts about how we used to learn, which was very different, and how you may maximize your experience today. If nothing else, I got to tell some tales, which I like to do. Thanks for listening.